looking at the plans to figure out what I've got to do next now that I've determined that the beams of the vessel have not been attached properly. So they're secure enough, but they haven't got any lateral strength. And it turns out that the rubber that's underneath the beams was there to hold the beams up, but that's not the way it's meant to happen. The way it's meant to happen is this hardwood wedge that's placed underneath the beam is in the original plans. They've updated those to have this large section here with a bolt going through that. Now, the other thing that, after speaking with Hennick on the phone, she sent me was the beam lashing for classic designs. So this one is copywritten 2001, and it shows a much more detailed view of the beam and how it's pinioned and attached through to the under the frame, but below. So those pieces of wood that the bolts are going through exists on Han'Nu'Na. They're actually there, but this carrying beam is not. So this beam is made up of, or this it's a blocker, a beam chalk, I guess they call it. No, those are the chalks. What do they call it? What do they refer to this as? There's quite a lot here in terms of how that's built and the way that it's going to move. It's going to be on a bolt that has a slot that allows the vessel to, let me just give you a better view of this. So there's a slot that carries the beam here, and this is the unique thing about the Wharram design. One of the unique things is that the beams are built to be able to flex and move. So this is actually, what we're looking at here is an actual design that is similar to what's on the tikis. And in fact, this was after the tiki system was built. They came up with this idea for being able to do the same thing, the lashed beams instead of the bolted beams on the classic designs, which were primarily done with the bolts. So here's the lashing system, but the key piece that I'm missing is this this piece of wood here that then will support the beam from the center point. And it's going to use this slotted bolt hole with a bushing in there that allows it to move up and down as it rocks back and forth. Now, the other thing is that in this case, there's nothing underneath the beam. In the old design, there's a block that's shown here. It's labeled as a hardwood wedge. But in this system, that doesn't exist. So what Hennick has explained to me on the phone is that I need to put in these blocks at either end. So what'll happen is and it actually says that somewhere on here it says, yeah, the beam should never lift clear of their seating blocks more than approximately a ½ inch. So that means that they'll actually rise off of that or that, depending on which way the beam is moving. So there is meant to be this little bit of flex in there, and that's one of the unique aspects of the Wharram design, is that the vessel actually flexes as it moves through the water. What that does in the end of the day is that produces a cleaner and smoother movement through the water. So that slamming that occurs and catamarans are known for, there's two reasons catamarans slam from my understanding, the research I've done. One is that they're all solid, and so they're moving through the water as one big piece but two hulls and doing this thing like that, whereas a single hull will move through the water like this. These solid boats are moving all together and not flexing and slamming. The idea with the Wharram is that there's just that little bit of flex that moves through the water so that it's not quite as rigid And also the other reason that I understand a lot of catamarans slam is because the pods that they build in the middle that are all part of this solid system with the two hulls together is often quite, it can be close to the water, and thus you get a slam underneath. So you're getting the hulls doing that, but also the pod hitting the top of the swell. And it's supposed to be, I've not been on a vessel doing that, but I've heard it's very uncomfortable. And I imagine pretty noisy, having been on just a mono hull, going over and doing that, and how noisy that can feel. Imagine two hulls doing it and a drum skin in the middle, which is basically what that big pod is, being slammed under the bottom would be not very nice, would it? So James and Henneke's designs are all based on that flexibility, which is indicative of the Polynesian design, which was always lashed with ropes. They didn't have bolts. There was all organic material, and so they saw this and saw the way that worked, and pursued that design. So finally, what I've got to do here is I've got to build these beams that will, well, sorry, not beams. They're carrying blocks, and they've got an angle iron piece. So let's see if I can zoom in on this a little better. So as you see here, there is a carrying block that's on either side of the beam. Now this either side of the beam thing won't work for Han'Nu'Na because Han'Nu'Na has raised cabin tops, and that was a later design as well. So the original classic Tehini is one raised cabin top in the middle, but then everything else was low and flat. So a later design, they raised everything up in between the beams, which gave a lot more height in the cabin spaces. So here we're looking at two blocks, but in all cases we're going to be doing this. So it's a single block on one side, an angle piece, a bolt going through to a hardwood backer inside the cabin rooftop, or in the bulkhead side there. And then in between those is a piece of low friction PTFE or nylon, so that it's able to rub up against it but not do any damage. And those are throughout. So in this image here, we've got, you can see here are the two PTFE pieces. This long piece is bolted down to the deck roof, and then a piece of angle iron that's cut to look nice there, and the whole thing has got PTFE in between the other side and the bolt going through with this slotted system. So these are the pieces that I need to build. So I've got to figure out my dimensions now on my hull and where those bolts sit, and then I've got to figure out the size of this guy and build him accordingly. Now, before I do that, I have these cabin roofs where it's actually kind of more above the locker section, but where the beams have pressured down, which I've shown in the last video, and in some cases it's cracked. It's actually cracked to the join where the bulkhead of the cabin roof is, and the beam where it sits here, it's separated some of the plywood there. So that's something I have to repair. So I've got to lift the beams and repair that. But ideally, after I lift the beam and repair it, I immediately can put this long block in place and connect everything up properly. So it's that chicken and egg question. Do I build the blocks first and have them ready to go, or do I go and lift the beam and do some repair work? Now, the one beam that I've cleared and I've made space for, which I believe is beam number 3, I believe it's one at the front, 2 and 3. It's on the plans here somewhere, but I don't have them in front of me. That on beam number 3, I'm ready to lift, but there's no damage there. So in this case, I need the blocks. So what I'm probably going to do is go ahead and build all the blocks in one go. So that's going to be eight of these things that I wasn't expecting to be doing. But there you go. That's part of the joys of working with a vessel that you buy secondhand. So I've just arrived down to Han'Nu'Na. It's a bit of a rainy day. I'm just having a cup of tea, as we do in this part of the world. Got to start everything with a cup of tea, and here you pretty much take a break as regularly as possible and have another cup of tea and maybe a couple of dark chocolate McVitie's biscuits. If you haven't had any of those before, oh, you don't know what you're missing. Anyway, I'll maybe talk about the extols of McVitie's biscuits another time. Going to just take some measurements here of the region that I need to build these chocks, and do a proper count and get all the measurements and diameters sorted out. Draw it up directly onto these plans, which Henneke had actually digitally sent to me so I can print them up as many times as I want, which is helpful. They don't usually do that, but in this case, it was one page of something that was missing from my overall plans, which is curious. I really don't understand why Tony didn't do that originally, because looking at everything else he did it to a very high standard, and so it's a bit surprising that he didn't do that, and I don't know what his thinking was. But anyway, we hope to resolve that fairly quickly. Well, I don't know about quickly, but I'm here at my house in County Fermanagh in Northern Ireland. This is where I've lived for almost since 1993. This is a house that I built. It's a yurt roof on a roundhouse wall. And I'm just headed out to my workshop here, which is something I built during the COVID pandemic. So there's a 40-foot container there on the right side that I bought and used when I was building my trawler, and I relocated it here and then built this lean-to off this building to make this workshop. So this is my workshop here in County Fermanagh. Bit of a mess, but I've got a nice rolling table saw, nice big band saw, glass and ceramic kilns for blowing glass, as I do sometimes, and a chop saw, nice chop saw station. When I refit my trawler, I had a lot of leftover oak and quite a bit of Iroko, which is often known as the poor man's teak in this part of the world. I'm going through my workshop here and finding pieces that I can use to cut into the risers and the pads that I'll talk about in the next video and where they go. And in the following video, I'll actually insert them and put them in place. So here I'm using my workshop just to cut the pieces, get them to the right thickness and the right size so that I can use and utilize this old wood that's sitting there looking for a purpose. So here I've gone off to the hardware store to get some wood in order to make the blocks or beams that are going to hold the angle iron piece that then will have the bolt going through the main beams. So I'm just cutting the pieces to length and taking them back to the workshop and cutting them to the right size. And then I'll angle them and make them into nice little risers to be fitted more carefully once I get back to the boat.